I think we have two very interesting and divergent trends. You have fragmented audiences, but you also have hyper-connected audiences. So I no longer have an audience called employees or media or investors because they all kind of run into each other and look at the same channels. I think what that really means is that I really need to have my core messaging very strong, and then I find the relevant stories. I also use them each other to tell the stories. I use my employees really very effectively to tell the stories to the others. Media finds that a lot more credible. I can put out a social media from an employee story or a video on Twitter or Facebook. Much more, it'll get me far more likes and viral effect than a company post. So I think using employees to tell the story to the investors, to media, to the outside world, the customers. I find customers to come and tell the story to the internal. Sometimes employees are the most skeptical audience. And a customer story actually works even more brilliantly inside than it does outside. So I think it's about finding those core messages and making them work across. I think the piece that I find interesting is we haven't given up watching web series and movies. We still watch a lot of content. So we still sit for an hour or 2 hours inside an auditorium, in front of a screen, in front of our laptops, and watch a story. So I do not think that we're necessarily distracted when we find something compelling. I think it's just that we are so much, we're trying to do so many things. And I think for communicators, that means you do less. I think it's very important to prioritize and try and tell very few stories and tell them really well and tell them to the people that matter rather than trying to tell every story there is. I've worked with organizations which has like tens and thousands of people, and I'm sure there are brilliant stories across. If I had to try and tell a story, all the stories that existed in the organization, it would be really difficult. So it's important to find the really right stories and then really find the right platforms. A town hall, of just say 1,000 or 2,000 people is a great place to say a story. And then technology is a great amplifier, because then if I give a live stream, which people can watch across my other locations, but I also tell them it's a video available on download, I usually find that the word of mouth carries enough effectiveness that if it was a good storytelling session, the 2,000 people watched it live, and then maybe about 4,000 people watched it on a webcast or a live stream, and invariably I find nearly 10,000 people willing to download it. So I think it's really about making sure that you have the right story and then really building it up. What I think it's really important is how do you really marry the cause of the story to the message of your company. There could be a brilliant swimmer who's just swum the channel, great for him, we're very happy. How do I leverage that story for my company? And if I had to say that if that's a Facebook post, that swimmer, because it's a live tracking being done as he swims the English Channel, a lot of the employees in the company are tracking that across Facebook. I think suddenly it's a story of a company where people work together, and that goes through far more effectively than everyone trying to make a video about it. So I think there are different ways to tell a story. It doesn't all have to be in one place. It's important to remember that one can do it in very many different ways. I think my biggest challenge, and I'm speaking maybe a little more from an Amazon India perspective here, is to go back to the old story. Most people forget. E-commerce today is such a part of our lives. People forget Amazon started it all. So sometimes it's about reminding, why was this company so innovative? What's so special about it? Sometimes it's about finding stories in the smallest of places, because inside the company it's so easy to take them for granted. Amazon has this wonderful thing, for example, called 12 Leadership Principles. Now, most people outside really don't seem to know a lot about it. And each of those leadership principles is so, you'll hear conversations inside the company where they quote it all the time. Or we have to deep dive, we must disagree and commit, we must have a bias for action. And each of them have very interesting stories how they came about. And that's something that we don't always remember to talk about internally or externally. So sometimes it actually means going back, and it's about something which is so familiar that you've forgotten to ask what's the story behind it.